Two women used the same words for 3 months. One of them was referred to as a scab. The other either heard nothing at all or applauded. You can learn everything you need to know about the WNBA Players Association situation going into the most significant labor deadline the league has ever faced from that one unquestionable contradiction. The ownership groups didn't need to take any action, which is the crazy part. They didn't need to create a controversy, fabricate a story, or run a campaign of pressure. All they had to do was observe as a split union used a digital record that never fades or forgets to gradually destroy its own credibility in front of the public. What you're going to hear is not conjecture. It is recorded. It's time-stamped, and it's the kind of accountability breakdown that the mainstream sports media has been cautiously avoiding for months since, in order to deconstruct it honestly. It would be necessary to say things out loud that would make many big voices look extremely bad. Let's speak to them then. Calling it a negotiation obscures what was truly happening in that room and within that union, so you have to start with the battlefield Caitlin Clark entered in order to comprehend what transpired. For 16 months, the WNBA and its players have been at a standstill over collective negotiations. After 16 months of preparation, 16 months of hardening stances, and 16 months of rising vitriol on both sides, the atmosphere in the discussion had essentially turned flammable. Authorization for strikes wasn't a looming threat. The backdrop. It was in motion. It was placed on the table. Using the nuclear option as their main tool of leverage in a battle they felt they couldn't afford to lose, players had publicly proposed ending the season. It wasn't a minor altercation either. The biggest broadcast contract in the league's history, worth $2 billion, was just waiting. This was not the WNBA of the past, hoping someone would sign a regional cable deal. Observed. This league had at last gained widespread commercial recognition. And the evidence was that contract. At that point, the product had at last fulfilled the promise. The position of the season leadership was unambiguous and unwavering. Either nothing or 27 of overall income. The line was that. They had placed their flag there. Additionally, the union's most well-known voices were united in their statement. Above all, solidarity. Keep the line and make no concessions. With strike authorization in effect and the temperature rising daily, music Caitlin Clark entered that pressure cooker in December and did something that no one in the veteran establishment wanted her to do. She told the truth, not a convoluted truth or a political truth that needed careful hedging, spin, or framing. A simple, financially solid, logically sound conclusion that anyone who had ever given labor economics a serious thought for 5 minutes might have come to on their own. According to her, the WNBA was at its most significant turning point in the sport's history. The situation was delicate, she remarked. According to her, it couldn't withstand a work stoppage without seriously harming momentum from casual viewers to the broadcast partners who had just written a $2 million check. $2 billion checks under the presumption that a product, music, would be available for broadcast. She also said that you couldn't get the most out of a league that had gone dark and that the product needed to be on the floor. No eyes, no games. No ad income, no eyeballs. Number 2, no broadcast partners interested in renewing at a premium, and no ad money. $2 billion leverage in the upcoming CBA discussion. The calculation was linear. The arithmetic was clear music, and despite the fact that it was true, she said it calmly and straightforwardly. She wasn't undermining unity. She wasn't going too far. She was attempting to prevent the union from destroying the same thing that first enabled all of their influence. Music this season players didn't want to hear it that way. It wasn't. Organic criticism that came next. It wasn't an organic, messy dispute among a coalition of players who merely observed the circumstances. In a different way, music the subsequent events were arranged. It persisted. Additionally, it was created with a certain objective in mind. Before the message has a chance to spread, discredit the messenger. The attacks were swift and came from several directions at once. A narrative about Clark was constructed by prominent voices in the WNBA media ecosystem, pundits, analysts, retired players, and union-affiliated personalities, designed to undermine her rather than address her point of view. The Nike music endorsement turned into a weapon. The argument was that her enormous off-court income had impaired her judgment. That someone earning as much money from endorsements as Clark did couldn't possibly see the labor situation clearly, that she was shielded from the financial realities faced by players without her commercial profile, and that, as a result, her viewpoint was invalid before it could even be taken into consideration. The next angle was blind to her comrades. The focus of the argument changed from what she said to what she supposedly didn't comprehend. The players who made less money were having a hard time. The difference between a rookie on a minimum contract and Clark's reality was so great that she was unable to express it. This one had just enough superficial plausibility to stay, which made it clever. There is, of course, a pay disparity. Naturally, a role player barely making the league minimum has a different lived experience than a star at the franchise level. That is accurate. The economic argument she had made about what would happen to the league as a whole if the season didn't exist is logically refuted by what it isn't and wasn't intended to be. The word scab then appeared. It became associated with her name and spread widely in media coverage, comment sections, and internet forums where WNBA discussions take place. Scab. A term having actual labor movement weight. A word with meaning and history. Applied to a player who had not violated any strikes, crossed any picket lines, or done anything other than openly claim that a work stoppage would harm the union's long-term standing. The objective was clear: destroy the credibility. Anyone who supported Clark was made to feel as though they were supporting someone who was essentially opposed to music, the players, the movement, and the camaraderie around which the union had based its whole public image. Make the argument radioactive music by first rendering the individual radioactive. And it worked for a while, months, in fact. Clark's remarks became part of the larger story of her as a contentious person. The media apparatus had successfully reframed a simple economic debate as a character problem since the veteran establishment had complex sentiments about him for reasons that predated the CBA and went beyond any one public utterance. And problems with character are far more difficult to combat than economic ones. The issue with the digital record is as follows, though. It has no expiration date. Paige Bueckers is not an outsider. That's the first thing you need to know about the significance of what transpired next. There was a background to Clark's complex connection with the veteran establishment. She was brand new. Her hometown was Iowa. She had come with a commercial profile that caused discomfort for certain members of the league in ways that had nothing to do with basketball. The opposition she encountered had a cultural component that extended beyond policy differences. Bueckers is free of the burden. The Yukon pipeline is carried by her. She has the institutional stamp of Gino Orama, the musical lineage that gave rise to Diana Taurasi, Maya Moore, and Brianna. When it comes to defining what WNBA excellence should look like, the Elder Guard specifically cites Stewart. She comes from the right program, the right tradition, and the right area. She is exactly the type of player that the seasoned establishment wholeheartedly supports. Paige Bueckers is the epitome of an acceptable rookie voice. Thus, when she convened weeks prior to the deadline of March 10th to tackle the very CBA issue that had led to Clark being called a scab, the expectation, at least from the union's most outspoken members, should have adhered to the official stance, said the appropriate things, supported the 27, and held the line. She didn't. I don't want to strike, she stated. She mentioned how much she enjoys playing basketball. The situation must be addressed professionally, she said. Then, using language that allowed for no space for debate, she stated unequivocally that the product must be on the court. Go back and read that. The product must be on the court. That is the same way of thinking. The macroeconomic reasoning is the same. That's the same conclusion. The name linked to it was the single difference, the only thing that differed between Clark's statement in December and Boer's statement weeks before the deadline. Everyone then awaited the reaction. It never materialized. Because the lack of a response is a response in and of itself, that was the point at which everything fell apart. The same voices that had spent months painstakingly undermining Clark's credibility, voices that had been organized, loud, and persistent in their criticism, went utterly, noticeably, impossibly silent. Where were the postings that claimed Boers was anti-UN? Where were the media pundits who insisted that she examine her? Privilege, implying that her endorsement deals or Yukon money was distorting her understanding of what her teammates with lower incomes truly needed from this negotiation. The scab labels were missing. Where was the concerted effort to ensure that those who supported her realized they were supporting someone who opposed the players? They failed to show up. We understand where she's coming from, but it wasn't a whisper, a modified version of the criticism, or even a well. Rather, it was acknowledgement music that at least gave the impression of consistency. In the weeks leading up to the March deadline, the machine that had activated quickly in December remained fully powered off. Within hours, the internet became aware of it. Screenshots of the two statements side by side started doing the rounds. It was impossible to dispute the comparison between Clark's December remarks and Boer's pre-decline remarks based just on logic. The language, content, and economic foundation are all the same, yet the response is drastically different. At that point, the music that the seasoned establishment had painstakingly created over the course of 16 months began to fall apart. Because Bucher should have been subject to the same criticism if the criticism of Clark had truly been about the logic, the economic rationale, the implications for labor solidarity, and the possible harm to players at the lowest end of the compensation spectrum. No matter who is creating it, the music argument remains the same. If it was incorrect in December, according to Clark, it was incorrect in February due to brokers. Either the reasoning makes sense or it doesn't. And whether it holds doesn't depend on who is delivering it. However, Bucher's was not criticized. It didn't even get heated. It did not move. Music and what that unavoidably showed was that the criticism of Clark was never really about the disagreement. It has to do with Clark. It was regarding the political geography of this union and who was and wasn't permitted to say certain things. Additionally, Clark was positioned incorrectly on that map. At that point, the WNBA Players Association lost more than just its moral superiority. They revealed that the moral superiority had never really been the goal in the first place. This is the point at which the union's internal drama turns into a real strategic catastrophe, because the ownership groups were also observing all of this. Consider what they observed across the negotiation table during the viral Boers-Clark analogy. They were observing a union whose loudest voices had spent months fighting against a stance that their own members now publicly embraced and whose public rhetoric was clearly incongruous. They were observing a player base that was clearly divided over the all-or-nothing stance on which its leadership had based the entire negotiation. In a sense, they were witnessing the union's public campaign's credibility infrastructure crumble in real time on social media. Things could be screenshotted and archived by any capable communications team. A union that is divided is weaker. That labor idea is not disputed. That is the fundamental, first principle negotiation reality of music. The opposition knows they can wait when they notice the gaps, cite proof that your coalition is disintegrating, and witness your own members undercut the story you've spent 16 months crafting. They understand that music time is beneficial to them rather than detrimental. The proprietors might also wait. They weren't under any financial obligation to come to the table, unlike players who rely on their WNBA contract when a season is canceled. There has always been an uneven power dynamic during a lockout or strike. In contrast to players, particularly those who make the league minimum or nearly so, ownership can endure a difficult season. Each day the union's power was further diminished on the day the stalemate persisted. The receipts were seen by the owners. They sat comfortably and were well aware of what was happening. Music, a different catastrophe was developing within the actual bargaining room as the public collapse of credibility was taking place. Ownership had presented a substantial counterproposal. Veteran role players would receive yearly rises of almost $200,000 under their baseline salary offer. Athletes who used to make about $90,000 annually. That is more than twice as much. You acknowledge that number, finalize the remaining terms, and sign in almost any professional setting, industry, seniority level, or labor negotiation. It's not a ceiling. That serves as a basis. Music, you capitalize on that victory, bank the advancement, and leverage the energy for the subsequent CBA discussion from a more powerful position. When the principal prevents your members from getting the money they actually need right now, you don't blow up the transaction on principle. In front of a microphone, veteran guard Natasha Cloud gave a convincing explanation of why that was insufficient. This was her point of contention. She clarified that the $200,000 amount seemed different after taxes, and housing music expenses in a market like New York City would lower what players actually brought home to something that didn't reflect the entire raise's worth. The negotiations were abruptly halted by the dispute. And since accuracy is important here, let's be clear about what that debate was. The expense of living in pricey cities, federal income taxes, state income music taxes, and typical adult financial duties were all presented by Natasha Cloud as if they were structural problems concealed in the owning group's concept. As though the owners had hidden the IRS's existence in the fine print to deceive players into taking less than they had agreed upon. As though renting a flat in Manhattan was an unheard-of financial situation. The league's obligation to address music in the CBA was exclusive to professional basketball players. Income taxes are paid by all working adults in this nation. Music, not simply the adults who didn't have decent agents or didn't negotiate hard enough. Every adult with a job. The income taxes are paid by a man operating a food truck in Detroit. Income taxes are paid by the Memphis nurse who works 2 shifts. Income taxes are paid by the Albuquerque teacher who grades papers on a Saturday. On his estate in Los Angeles, LeBron James pays property taxes. Music, he does not return to the Lakers' front office to demand renegotiation and explain that the assessed value of his property represents a fundamental flaw in his maximum contract. Patrick Mahomes manages his own mortgage. Russell Wilson takes care of his own finances. Professional athletes negotiate gross earnings, pay their legal taxes, and handle their own finances at every level in every league, sport, and generation of American professional sports. The ownership groups were unable to compromise on the idea that a $200,000 yearly rise is structurally insufficient because the federal government will take a piece of it. Since it cannot be a labor position, no labor group in any sport has ever been requested to bargain on it during a labor negotiation in the history of professional athletics. Music, no raise is ever sufficient if you accept the reasoning and the assumption that post-tax income is the pertinent figure for assessing a wage offer. This is because every raise is subject to taxation, creating an unresolvable infinite regression. That argument didn't require a response from the owners. Music, the dispute addressed itself. In the midst of the most significant negotiation the league had ever undertaken, they had to acknowledge it for what it was, a gift. A public declaration from a well-known union voice that gave them precisely the narrative they needed to make the seasoned leadership appear strategically incoherent. The owner's PR job had just been made easy by the union. As the deadline drew near, those who were still holding out were facing down this truth. The athletes who are aware of the true risks, those who have done the arithmetic and understand that the league's negotiating value is solely dependent on it being a useful, visible, and financially relevant product, are prepared to take action. They knew something that the all-or-nothing contingent had either forgotten or decided to overlook, so they were prepared. A working product is necessary for maximum leverage. A league that is losing casual fans, renegotiating TV arrangements, and silently observing corporate sponsors cannot be forced to give up 27% of its gross revenue. Start the process of locating exits. The veterans had fewer options in March than they did in September, despite having established their public reputation on a strong stance. The Boers analogy had taken place. The tax dispute had taken place. In less than 90 seconds, any journalist with a search function could access the digital receipts, which were time-stamped and permanent music. The proprietors were seated comfortably. They had witnessed everything. Music in the weeks leading up to the final deadline, they had witnessed a union publicly contradict itself after spending 16 months crafting a public narrative. They had seen well-known, seasoned voices present economic arguments that could not withstand a simple fact-check. Additionally, they were seated across the table from a player base that was obviously not as cohesive as its leadership had claimed. Any labor economist will tell you that a union that is divided is weaker. That is hardly a conservative viewpoint. That isn't propaganda about ownership. Because it has been shown in every industry, every negotiation, and every strike action in the history of organized labor, that is the first thing taught in every labor relations course at every university in the nation. The asset is unity. The opposite side of the table obtains an advantage. They did not have to earn it the moment unity breaks. In a public video with timestamps, the WNBA Players Association voluntarily gave up that power. The product had to be on the ground, according to Caitlin Clark. She made this statement in December, when the union's leading spokespeople were still crafting the all-or-nothing narrative they would spend the ensuing months defending. The CBA crisis was at its most unstable, and strike authorization was in effect. She spoke with composure, directness, and sound financial reasoning. The machine came for her because she said it. The scab label went around. The concerted campaign got underway. Months of character music attacks meant to ensure the argument never received a fair hearing obscured the message. Weeks music before the deadline of March 10th, Paige Booker made the same statement. She stated that the product must be on the floor, that she enjoys playing basketball, and that she doesn't want to strike. The veteran establishment had spent years defending her institutional legitimacy. Music after she stated that there was an almost deafening quiet. Music within hours, the side-by-side comparison became viral. The receipts were retrieved from the internet, and they revealed what the union leadership had spent 16 months attempting to deny. It was never difficult to do the math. Products in a lockout are valued less than those on the floor. A $2 billion broadcast agreement is a starting point. Not a ceiling that may be negotiated. Music unity is the leverage and solidarity is the asset. But only if it's genuine, applied consistently, and doesn't crumble under the weight of its own inconsistencies when the right thing is said by someone with the wrong name. The money was no longer the primary concern going into the deadline. It has nothing to do with post-tax take-home adjustments, gross revenue percentages, or if Manhattan rent is a fundamental defect in an offer of ownership. The question was whether those who were still holding out would let the time run out, not because the proposal was actually inadequate, but rather because accepting it would imply music that the rookie had been correct all along. And that type of pride is costly in labor movements, as it is in most human enterprises. It is more expensive than taxes. It is more expensive than rent. Music, the price difference is greater than 27. And the exact number that was on the table. Music, the one thing a union cannot afford to lose, is what it ultimately costs. The authority to speak with a single voice and persuade others. How do you feel about the double standard? Is there an angle here that hasn't been thoroughly explored, or did the seasoned establishment apply entirely different norms to Clark and Buchers? Leave a comment with your thoughts. Subscribe and hit the notification bell if this type of analysis is what you've been searching for, the topics that the conventional sports media mentions but never delves into. Music, the next film explores what happens when the deadline passes without a settlement, and which union speakers are already subtly shifting their positions in anticipation of the ensuing power shift. Nose.